Hey YouTube, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. It's red and white, it's small, fast, has switchable lights, high voltage buzzer, and it can take quite a beating. As you've maybe already seen in the short bashing and running video I've uploaded a few days ago, my Orlandoo Rock Bouncer 1232. Here it is, super cool. Electronics and batteries not simply stuffed into the cage or even on top of it, but placed nearly invisible inside. That's what I wanted. My first intention was also to build a simple interior, at least backrests, but there was simply not enough room. So I simply put two driver heads into the cage. Still looks better than a car without driver, at least in my opinion. And that's what I wanted, but it was not an easy build. I started already about 2 months ago with my Orlandoo build, and I wanted to make a step-by-step building video following the manual, but building cage, axles, gears, links, this wasn't really difficult. In this part, the Rock Bouncer is maybe even the easiest to build of all Orlandoo kits I've built all so far. But difficulties started after this, with electronic selection and test and installation, and the manual, it doesn't say a single word about this. So if you are not interested in the build of the kit, only in the much more challenging part of the electronics installation, then directly jump to where I start to show and explain how I did it and what I used. Before I will show very briefly the step-by-step build of the kit and talk a little bit about different ESCs, receivers and batteries which I thought of using for my Orlandoo Hunter OH32X01. Choice wasn't really easy. So let's start. Let's build an Orlandoo Rock Bouncer. I love Orlandoos, I do have all models, and I think they are awesome, and I love this tiny stuff. So of course I had to buy the Rock Bouncer 2. I also ordered a motor. I ordered the 3000. I wanted the fastest motor that's available for an Orlandoo, because I think Rock Bouncer should have quite some speed, not so much for climbing in my other Orlandoos. I use mostly 200 and 300 motors. 500, it's already too fast. I also tried 80, that's too slow. I also ordered this awesome new tiny brushless motor from Surpass Hobby with only 2500 kV. I hoped maybe it would fit the Orlandoo some way, but the Rock Bouncer, the 32X01, does have the same mounting system for motors as all the other Orlandoos, so probably I won't be able to use this motor, even if I would have loved to make it brushless. And I also did already order those upgrade shocks. I already built them. They look awesome in my eyes. This will be a build video, will it? Not really. I don't think you want to see me building the whole Orlandoo. I will build part by part and then show the different steps and tell if there are some problems or not. Manual, as usual. That's all quite good in Orlandoos. Stickers, what else do we get? Gears, shocks. I won't use the shocks probably. That's nice for the frame. Some probably aluminium stuff. I will paint this probably. The screws, a lot of tiny screws, some link parts, and the links, the most nasty part of the build as always. More gears, more plastic parts, tires with foams, rims. Maybe I will put a little bit of weight into the rims. And finally the cage. Quite cute. So I build it step by step. First axles, as always in Orlandoo's. Probably only axle mounted servo in the bouncer. In the other models you could frame or axle mount, rear axle, everything nicely with ball bearings, links, motor and center gearbox. Yeah, the brushless motor probably won't work. Shocks, and then everything is mounted into the frame, including those plates. I think this will be the easiest Orlandoo build ever, so I will start. So axle build, everything perfect, no problems so far. Step 4, don't search for those 3 parts. Those are the CVDs and they are already assembled. So beautiful tiny CVDs. Front axle assembled, no problem at all. I lubricated the gears, and if it's your first Orlandoo build you won't have any problems. You get all the tools with the kit you probably could need. Also 0.9mm hex wrench, but I really can recommend to buy one of those, a 0.9mm hex wrench. It makes it much easier to assemble all those ball ends. And furthermore, also a 000 Phillips head screwdriver, PH000, comes quite handy. You will be able to do it with a screwdriver coming with a kit. Probably, I never tried it with a 00 also, but one of those tiny ones makes life much easier. And as always, a bearing pusher comes handy too, but not only in those tiny kits, to press in ball bearings into the C-hubs and other parts. Rear axle finished, no problem. Everything worked like a charm. I didn't get any grease with my Orlandoo Rock Bouncer kit. Guess that's the first Orlandoo kit that arrived without grease. However, I did grease the gears. Runs perfectly smooth. Links finished. The most painful part of every Orlandoo build, and the bouncer was no difference. There's always a problem. You'll have to screw on how many? 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 20 rod ends, and 19 rod ends worked fine, no problem at all, and with one rod end there was a big problem. And this one rod end cost me more time, probably, or nearly as much time than all the other rod ends together. You get some spare rod ends, but the problem was not the rod end. The problem was the thread of one of those rods, which didn't work. So after a lot of trying, I finally drilled a slightly larger hole into the rod end and pressed and a little bit screwed it to the rod. Seems to sit quite fine, and if it wouldn't work you could use a little bit of glue. And what's new here? They want you to bend one of those rods into this shape. So that's not such an easy job. I don't know, maybe you guys tell me no problem at all, but it's so tiny. I used flat end pliers of different width, but not a super easy job. However, it's done now. As always, you can use the manual. The length is correct here, or of course you can also use some kind of ruler to measure the length of the different rods. So, worst part done. Links mounted to the axles, step 12 and 13, no problem at all move freely, but this one, but it will move later on, I hope, after some time of usage. Motor, gearbox, no problem, smooth, runs quite okay. Forward, 8 volt. We'll have to break in a little bit the motor. But there was a problem. One of the most difficult parts, as always, that's the base plate. And those are those ball joints on the base plate. No problems with the outer ones, but those, the inner ones, they are always quite difficult to mount, and you won't be able to use a driver like this for getting those in. So you should use your hex wrench delivered with the Orlandoo. However, for the second joint, even this will not work, because I hope you can see it on camera. Some better light here. It's already too long, and furthermore, the hex wrench that was delivered with this Orlandoo is really of poor quality. And what I did and do, if you have such hex wrenches from other models, maybe that's even one from an elder Orlandoo, you could try to bend them. Normally they won't bend, they will break. So you can make a shorter one, as I did here, and then insert the opposite ball joint with this shorter hex wrench. And I broke one of the mounts. I did not break one so in all Orlandoo models, but the very first one, the Ford. And in this one, so probably you should drill the holes before mounting those ball screws. You can see it here. Maybe you can see it better with the loop. This one was broken when I screwed the ball joint in. There was no problem, it was not in totally, and then I heard a crack and it was broken. So better use a small drill to widen the holes a little bit. Okay, what's next? Next is building the shocks. I will not do this because I will use my upgrade shocks I did already build. And next step, okay, cage and plates. I will paint my cage and those panels. Step 19, paint, frame and mount those plates. Painted frame and plates and mounted them. Ton of tiny screws. And they also want you to mount LEDs already now. I won't mount LEDs now in front and 3 SMD LEDs in the back side. If I will use LEDs, probably I will do this later. And next step, mount the last plates and mount the motor to the frame. Let's do this. So, motor and gearbox mounted and the last plates. Quite narrow inside, but so far no problem. And now they want us to mount shocks and axles. So let's do this. And here it is, finished. Of course, by far not finished. I finished the body or the cage, and it looks really nice, awesome. Wheels, I also mounted the wheels. They do look really nice, really cool. I used the foams, but did not yet glue them. Don't know for sure if it will be necessary, but I will have to check. Maybe some wheel weights, a little bit of weight in the wheels will be good or not, so I won't glue the tires to the rims now. But if you think that's most of the work that's been done now, no, you are wrong. Mounting the axles and the links and the shafts is a little bit of a hassle, but you will be able to do it. But all the electronic is still missing, only the motors inside with a huge cable and 2mm JSTPH plug. But where to put the electronics? And funny thing, the manual doesn't say anything. So last step, tires and axle wheelbase adjustment, and that's it. And now you are alone. I guess they want you to use the all-in-one new receiver ESC light unit of the Orlandoo radio, I don't know, but I don't find really any room for the electronics and for the battery. Here inside is a little bit of room. Here's the drive shaft turning. Maybe here's a little bit of room, and here on the side. And I don't want to fill the whole interior with the battery. Looks ugly in my opinion. They recommend 120 milliamp hours 2S tiny batteries. I don't have such tiny 2S. I do have 180 milliamp hours, tiny 200 milliamp hours. The larger ones, the 260, are already far too large. But the only way to place and change the battery is probably here. You call this window. So if you would place it to the bottom, it will touch the drive shaft. I'm not sure if I will use one of those 180s. I have a couple of them. Or this 200 is already very old and even smaller. Or maybe if I will use 1S batteries and connect them in series. So this would be possible too, left, right. However, not an easy thing. I think it will be necessary to secure the drive shaft here a little bit. Otherwise, if it's turning, it could damage a battery. And where to put receiver and ESC? Of course, LEDs are missing, 3 red LEDs in the back side and 2 white ones in the front. Unfortunately, I guess again 4mm LEDs. Nobody has 4mm LEDs. I do have tons of 3 and 5 and 1.8 and 1 centimeter and SMD LEDs. And I did already search for Orlandoo for 4mm LEDs. They are extremely hard to get and they are very expensive. I don't know why they use such strange LED diameter I will use 3mm LEDs again, and with a little bit of shrink tube this works. The 4mm LEDs do come with the Orlandoo ESC unit, so that's this unit, but I did already use those in different Orlandoo, and I'm still not sure which ESC I will use. That's the Orlandoo ESC. Of course, plug and play will not work for sure. It will be a direct soldering thing in most parts. Would be able with channel 3 to switch on off lights and to have a brake light. Turning lights are not important at all. Or I will use this awesome super cheap Dumbo RC ESC, which also has a light controller on off switch, of course without all the wires, direct soldering. I'm not sure yet. I'm thinking of placing the ESC maybe here on top of the motor. I will have to check which one will fit. The Orlandoo ESC does have a plug for the servo, so the low voltage servo, that's the only thing that's easy. It fits, can be plugged into the ESC, but there's no room anyway, and it only has a voltage of 3.3 volts, I guess, on the servo plug, but maybe the servos will break with 5 or 6 volts PC voltage as comes of the Dumbo RC ESC 6 volt. Maybe I'll test. And then there's also the problem of the receiver. Where's place? I told you I will use the tiny micro receiver for my FlySky Noble. I'm not totally sure anymore, so I would have to remove the plugs anyway, or the similar receiver from DAS Micro. It's also AFDHS3, so for the FlySky Noble. But since there's so tiny space in the room and I don't really want to destroy those rather expensive receivers, maybe I will use this super micro receiver, which is compatible with my FlySky GT3C, or even better, I'm not sure if there's room enough, I will use a normal 3-channel receiver, super cheap, for the FlySky GT3C, of course without box and without plugs. However, that's not an easy thing, so for sure this shouldn't be your first Orlandoo kit build. So I will try, I will test which batteries I will use, 2S or 1S in series, where to place them. Maybe I will make a kind of bottom plate here. Here the side buckets. There is a lot of room. This would be perfect for those 200 milliamp 1S. Those are from the... I use those for the 1S UMX planes, the tiny ones. The only way to place and remove batteries that way. So, quite difficult. I will test and think about this, and in the next take you will see the result and the Orlandoo Rock Bouncer driving. Yeah, and here finally it is, working awesome, but after some modifications and also some repairs. I finally used the 3000 RPM motor, the Dumbo RC 10 amp ESC, including light switch and low voltage passer, and the DAS Micro Super Micro receiver for my FlySky GT3C, because I had problems with the FlySky Noble micro receivers. I will tell you later. But before we jump into the electronics, some words to the Orlandoo Bouncer, because the Orlandoo Bouncer is a little bit special. Some things are a little bit different because it's much faster than a normal Orlandoo. And you saw my running video, it has to take quite a beating. So first of all, I told you repairing those link mounts on the bottom plate will work. That's a new one. Those are the problematic ones. There's even a molding line. I told you a little bit of CA glue will fix the problem, what it did in my slow Orlandoo Ford, but it did not in my Orlandoo Bouncer. So in my first test runs, this broke again and the link came off, so it's not strong enough. I tried a little bit and finally I glued this with Uhu Endfest Plus and let it seal for 24 hours. If I would have known this during the building process, I would immediately have used another plate, another part. But now, if everything's assembled, it was so difficult and such a mess, I didn't want to disassemble this. So normal CA did not work. I guess that's epoxy from Uhu. This works so far, and with this repair it survived my whole test running jumping video without any problems. Furthermore, the link that did not work with the rod end, the plastic rod end, and I told I used the drill and widened the hole a little bit and drilled the rod into it only slightly. This didn't work either, so it came off. It was not strong enough. And since the end of this rod, the thread was not okay, and I couldn't really screw it in, I finally decided simply to clip off about 1 millimeter, the last millimeter of this rod where the thread had the problem, and then it worked finally perfectly. Furthermore, you will have to use thread lock for the wheel nuts urgently. I guess I didn't do this in all my other Orlandoos, but when I made the first test drives with the Bouncer and I simply put on the wheel nuts, they came off. So urgently need to use thread locks, and you will unfortunately have to glue the tires. The tires came off immediately in curves, mainly on the inner side. So finally I decided to glue the tires so far only on the inner side, not yet on the outer side, because I'm still not sure if the tires would need a little bit of weight. I don't think so. But without gluing those tires to the rims, they will come off immediately. This can all be very different in your Orlandoo Bouncer if you wouldn't use that fast motor that I use. So if you use only a 200-300 RPM motor, probably it will behave as every other Orlandoo. Another point, the Orlandoo Rock Bouncer doesn't come with grease for the gears. All Orlandoos but the Rock Bouncer and the Raptor, so the last two ones, the two newest ones, came with grease, with a lot of grease. Probably most of you will know those. I have quite a lot of those. But the new ones do not come with this. I greased the gears in the axles, also the center gears. If you don't have this, you can simply buy white grease, it's cheap. What batteries did I choose? First, I use a very simple on-off switch here on the front. You can see it, which works awesome in such tiny trucks which draw only very little amps. You can't do this in larger trucks. I simply connected it to the battery circuit, and this tiny switch, something like this, simply mounted with 3M tape to the frame. I even didn't have to glue it. Works awesome. And I finally decided to use those 160 milliamp hours 1S Turnigy batteries. And I used 2 of those and connected them in series to make one 2S LiPo. And they are placed in this part of the frame on the left and on the right side. I removed the black plastic cap, sealed everything, and then put black shrink tube over the cells and connected the 2 cells with a simple connector like this one. So 2 1S JST GH 1.25 millimeter plugs and 1 2S JST PH 2.0 millimeter plug. Didn't use this kind of wire. Those are, you can buy them that way, but unfortunately this wire is not flexible at all. So I simply made custom adapters out of silicone wire, which can be a little bit of a hassle because crimping silicone wire is first not that easy, and second, the silicone wire is not that sturdy, but it was not flexible enough to work here. So the final battery wire is made out of silicone wire, and I have to take care if I take it out. I love those 2S plugs. So I finally took the Turnigy 160 milliamp hours batteries. I did not take the Turnigy Nanotech 160 milliamp hours batteries. Those are really good batteries. Those are super old. I probably will have them for 8 years or whatever. The Nanotech, they don't last long. They're 160. I would like to have used the Nanotech 200 milliamp hours batteries. Use those also for small 1S planes, but unfortunately they were too long, not enough space. Of course, other batteries would have worked too. For example, those 182S batteries would have worked, those 200. Then I would have had to place the battery here on the bottom. And there's the drive shaft that turns, could be dangerous. And I wouldn't have had enough room to put ESC and receiver inside and make a simple interior. I also thought of, I don't have 120 or 130 milliamp hours 2S batteries, but I found those two 1S 130 milliamp hours would have been able to make a custom 2S battery, but I think that's the best solution. But there is a big disadvantage you can probably think of. You can't remove the batteries from the car. So I have to charge the batteries inside the car. What you see here, the black wire, that's the antenna of the receiver. So a little bit of a hassle. It's not super easy. If I would make this again, I would make the lower wires a little bit longer, but it works. For unplugging the batteries, I simply use, and take care, that's made out of metal, but only for unplugging, I simply use those pliers. Carefully. And that's not a big problem. It's more difficult to replug the batteries. And if you do this, take care. And if you replug the battery, take care. Never use a metal forceps to push those plugs into each other, because the forceps will touch the contacts and you will shortcut the battery. So that's very important. If I push the battery plugs together, I always use a plastic forceps and not a metal forceps. Soldering those is easy, those ones, but highly recommended to use a dummy. Otherwise those pins will melt the plastic and won't stay in place many times. And if the plugs go in and out very hard, then you can also simply remove the center pin of the plug on the car side, which goes to the ESC. You do only need plus and minus. You don't need the center pin because you won't balance. In the battery side, of course, you cannot remove this part because you need this for balancing the batteries. And therefore you will need some of those JSDPH2S adapter boards, para boards for charging, parallel charging, like those ones, or those ones, or this one, which can also charge JSTXH. Those are the 2S balance plugs, which also can be used for powering your models. In many models, for example, in those batteries coming with the Rock Hoppy Katana, with the CR18s and with the Atlas 6x6, they have a power plug and a balance plug, both 26 gauge wire. That's for nothing. You can cut this one by one, seal it, and use the JSTXH plug for powering your car. And with such a para board, that's an awesome board. It's a little bit expensive, but I like it very much. You can simply charge your batteries without having to plug two plugs. But for charging my rock bouncer, I simply made a long adapter cable so that I can easily charge it, and it works nicely. And here you can see there the plastic forceps is required. Maybe it's not a perfect solution, unfortunately, but it works. So simply plug it in, and you can see now 3.7 volts per cell, and I simply charge on it's automatically 2S, 0.1 amp or 0.2 amp, whatever, and that way I charge my batteries. So batteries charged up to 4.2 volts per cell. And now again the difficult part. I know that's not the perfect solution, but I don't find any other solution but using large batteries inside the cage where you easily can see it. So now the most difficult part, plugging them in again. If I would do this again, I would make this wire about 1 centimeter longer. Okay. Switch on again, and everything works fine again. I thought of making a kind of Velcro closing here, but I think that's not necessary. As you can see here, this works nicely and you don't really see it, so no Velcro. But a working rock bouncer. This ISDT SC620 seems to be perfect to jump. Yes. Battery is finished. As already mentioned, I highly recommend to use a single plug for powering and charging, balance charging. You can also use an JSDXH like this 2S balance plug, and you will not need for such a small car a special power plug. For example, you see this in this battery I used for my 130X years ago. I crimped JSTPH 2.0 to the balance plug wires. I cut the power plug wires, of course, one by one, and seal them. Works perfectly and saves a lot of room. Now let's talk about the ESC. Finally, I decided to use the awesome Dumbo RC 10 amp ESC, which has a channel 3 on-off plug and a low voltage buzzer and 3 modes: airplane, brake, with brake and without brake. Of course, we use without brake in the Orlandoo. Not of course. I use the mode without brake, the crawler mode in the Orlandoo, and of course you cannot use all those wires, they are far too large. But of course you could also use any other tiny ESC, for example also the Orlandoo ESC, which comes normally with wires. However, I wanted to use the Dumbo RC ESC because it has a 6 volt PSC, and I used 5 LEDs in my Orlandoo. There is room for 5 LEDs, 2 white ones in the front, of course we can switch them on, and 3 red ones, SMD LEDs, and the back side. And a white LED needs 3 volts and a red LED needs 2 volts. So this is perfectly for 6 volt. I can connect 3 red LEDs in series, perfectly for 6 volts, and 2 white LEDs, 2 times 3 volts in series, perfectly for the 6 volt PEC. And the on-off switch works awesome, and I don't need any blinker or brake light modes of the Orlandoo ESC in the Rock Bouncer anyway. However, I used the Orlandoo 2.2 gram servo in my Orlandoo, and this is a low voltage servo which only can work maximum 4.2 volts. I searched a lot for 2.2 gram servos with 16 millimeters width, but I didn't find any others than low voltage servo. For example, this FMS servo or this new, what's its name, AO whatever, I received recently. But all those super micro servos do only work with low voltage and not with 6 volts. So if I would power them directly with the voltage of the PSC of the Dumbo or Dumbo RC, probably they would break. So what did I do? I soldered 3 of those diodes in series to the red wire of the servo, which give the voltage decrease to up to 4 volt perfectly. So that's the stuff I've used. 1N4001 15 volt 1 amp diodes. This works perfectly, but it of course has a disadvantage because those diodes are large. They are tiny, but for an Orlandoo they are large, and 3 in series give about this area of hard to bend servo wire. It's placed here on the side. No perfect solution again, but a solution that works perfectly for me now so far, and I'm still searching for super micro servos. I do have quite a ton, also the 1.7 gram servos, but mainly with 16 millimeter, the 2.2 gram servos with 16 millimeter width, with 16 millimeter, which fit to the Orlandoo Axle servo mount, which can handle 6 volts, but so far I didn't have any success. I do have many ultra micro servos for small helicopters, which are all a little bit wider. The Dumbo RC ESC is awesome, but it did not work flawlessly. I had big troubles to making this ESC work, and now I'll tell you now why. If you check this Dumbo RC, that's a new one I ordered after I had the problems with the first Dumbo RC ESCs, which did not work. And this new or newer version, I guess, Dumbo RC ESC does come with one less pin. So one less pin bore here, and here's a bridge. You see, I show a photography. That's a 0 ohm resistor, so a bridge you can simply solder it or use a little bit of wire too. When I started, I had two Dumbo RC ESCs here. This one and the very first one that's now in my car. And they worked fine, and after unsoldering the wires, they didn't work anymore. The LED had still power, so there was light on the LEDs here, but the connections for the power, the voltage to the receiver had 0 volt. The receiver I use in here, I had unsoldered all wires, really nicely cleaned everything from solder, cleaned it with alcohol, didn't work. That's the same Dumbo RC of the probably old version. In this I only removed the huge amount of red sealing, there's a kind of glue or whatever, a huge amount to secure, maybe to make it waterproof because it's also enamel coated here, and simply unsoldered those two wires for the power of the receiver. And after unsoldering those, again there was no power anymore. We tried everything. Guys in Rockroller Forum, German Rockroller Forum, tried to help me. We tested everything, I tested everything, and we didn't find a reason why there was no power in those two, in the red and the black, that's going to the receiver. And so I ordered two new Dumbo RC ESCs, which arrived in less than 2 weeks from China. Wow. And then I found that those new ones, that's a new one too, first to have far less of this red sealing, red glue to secure from water or whatever. My GT3C. And after taking the shrink tube off, I found that there is this bridge here. And then a buddy from German Rockroller Forum found, hey, check this out. The Dumbo RC receiver does also have two pads for a bridge. And you can see it here on this photo. And those two tiny pads were connected by solder, probably. I didn't see it. There was shrink tube and everything quite sealed and full of wires. And that's why there was no power in the connection to the receiver. And after connecting this tiny bridge again, simply with solder, everything worked perfectly again. So if you are using or try or want to use the Dumbo RC ESC, and you will have to unsolder all this wire mess, and then it doesn't work, check it. This tiny bridge, connect it, and it will work. If you will have the newer version, you will see this 0 ohm resistor, what's simply a bridge, and you will probably not lose it. For these 2 weeks I stopped my build, and I did not simply switch to the Orlandoo ESC, because this has only 5 volts for the LEDs, and I tested it, and 5 volts is not enough for 2 whites in series or 3 reds in series, and I would have had to solder the LEDs in parallel. But at this time I did already glue or mount the LEDs to the frame, to the cage, and seal everything with E7000. Here I had already made all the wiring, had glued it with E6000, so I would have had to remove all this again, and I didn't want to do this, of course. So I waited, and finally everything turned out fine. But I had a even more severe problem, which maybe cost me quite a lot of money, or not a lot, a little bit of money. Initially, I wanted to use my FlySky Noble radio for my Orlandoo, and either the DAS micro or the FlySky Super Micro receiver I had bought for my FlySky Noble. So that's a new one now. That's the Super Micro receiver from FlySky, and that's the one from DAS Micro. I had already removed the plugs and resoldered them, and that's also a original FlySky Super Micro receiver, and normally they work awesome. But I started with the DAS Micro because it has only 4 plugs, and unsoldered the 4 plugs, and after this the receiver didn't work anymore. There were 6 volts on all connections, so on all servo connections, 6 volt, everything worked fine, 6 volt from the Tomboha C BSC, but the receiver didn't work, the LED didn't blink, nothing. So after this I thought, okay, maybe bad luck, I have broken it. I tried the same thing with the original FlySky Super Micro receiver for the Noble AF HDS3 receiver, and after unsoldering all the plugs, same thing. 6 volts in the servo positions, but LED doesn't work, receiver doesn't work. I tried everything, buddies tried to help me in the forum, made exact pictures. We didn't find what could be the reason. The only reason could be I didn't use ESD safe, so I simply unsoldered the plugs as I always do and didn't ground my arm, my hand, and maybe that's the reason why those receivers don't work anymore now. So if you intend to do this, take care. I really do not know why they don't work anymore. After this I have ordered a new one. This one, it did already arrive. Actually they are super fast from China, and I don't see any need actually to unsolder those plugs again and to try it again. I also bought this wristband for soldering, but since the DAS Micro receiver for my FlySky GT3C works fine, I won't test this now. But if any one of you has any tips what could be the reason but being destroyed because of electricity, please tell me what. Please post it in the comments. But so far they are not super cheap. Probably 2 broken receivers. The Super Micro receiver for the GT3C works fine, but it doesn't have plus minus for every servo. It has this auto binding system, so it's not that nice as the Super Micro receivers for the FlySky Noble, which have a bind button and plugs plus minus signal for every servo. And here you see the buzzer. I simply soldered one of those super cheap tiny buzzers, you get them everywhere for drones now, to the corresponding ports here on the Dumbo Dumbo RC ESC. But getting all this into the cage was not that easy. So before, as you can see here, I made a lot of testing. As I've already told you, many things did not work. Test. And after everything worked, I used Captain tape, so electrical tape a little bit, and 3M tape to stick the receiver to the Dumbo RC ESC, and finally put strong shrink tube around the ESC and the receiver. And that way the unit is quite secured here inside. Maybe you can see it, but it doesn't touch the drive shaft anyway. It's only pressed in between the gearbox and the end, and this seems to hold quite well. Initially I wanted to glue a little bit of plastic to the gearbox, but it didn't hold, so that the ESC unit cannot slip, but it does not slip at all. And for wiring all this stuff, the motor wires go up to here, the light wires come here. I removed the left and right clamp on the gearbox, so it's easier to show in the manual than to search a gearbox. Here you can see this, and those clamps probably meant to hold wires, but they take a lot of place, and I needed this place for my batteries. I clipped off those two clamps. Motor, let's talk a little bit about motors. I used the 3000 RPM motor, the fastest one. It's a little bit fast, but you can see I also can go slowly, not super slow, but can, and it can jump nicely. But maybe I would use the 2000 RPM motor. Now I really don't know. So far I'm quite happy, but it's super fast for inside. However, there's a little bit of confusion with the Orlandoo motors. There are the older motors, or the elder motors, which come with the red JST plug and are meant for the Orlandoo ESC, probably, which has such plugs. And you can buy them in, I guess, 80, 120, 150, 200, 300, and there was also a 500 RPM version. And I found that the 300 and 200 RPM versions are best for the normal Orlandoos. What I highly recommend, scratch the value. Maybe you can see it here. 300, that's a 300 motor. Otherwise it's quite hard or impossible if you have more than one to know which one is which. And that's 80 rounds per minute. I tested this years ago. That's far too slow for the normal Orlandoos. I recommend 300. And now they have released those new motors with 1000, 2000 and 3000 rounds per minute. I'm not sure if they even didn't write kV, what wouldn't make any sense anyway. 3000 kV or would make sense, I don't know initially, but now they are labeled as RPM. And they do come with JST PH 2.0 plugs and fit into the new receiver ESC unit of the Orlandoo radio. And honestly, I do not think that the 3000 RPM motor is 3 times as fast as the 300 RPM motor. With this motor, the Orlandoos go quite nicely and they are not slow on the ground. And of course, this one is much faster, but not 10 times as fast. That's really quite a bit of confusion. 500 RPM in the old motor series was far too fast. This 3000 RPM will probably too fast for a normal Orlandoo too. You probably saw my running and bashing video, and there you can see how fast it is. Maybe you should better buy the 2000, but a rock bouncer is no crawler, and I think it needs a little bit of speed. But if you, come on, okay, but if you want to crawl, man, and therefore will use only a 200-300 RPM motor, then probably all the things I told, which are special for the rock bouncer with the wheel nuts and gluing the tires, are not valid anymore. But I think it should go fast. And what's really a big surprise for me, that it's that sturdy now. You saw how hard I jumped it yesterday over an 1/24 crawler, an SCX24, and how hard it crashed, and no damage anymore after repairing those parts. So I hope I didn't forget anything. Wiring, of course, is a big mess, and that's why I do not want to remove the gearbox anymore. Even removing the gearbox is a mess in the bouncer, because you will have to remove those plates with 4 tiny screws before you can get to those 2 screws. So, and if I take this out again, this was so difficult to stuff all this stuff into this tiny cage. And so it will stay with the glued mount here and with the repaired link. I don't know which one it was one of the longer ones. When I jumped it very hard the first day, not when I made the video, the day before, I did bend the steering rod even. And why is it not easy to build? The main problem in the Orlandoo rock bouncer compared to all other Orlandoos, that's the cage. You cannot get inside and easily install the electronics. You hardly can make direct soldering. You have to, all the wiring I used plugs is quite difficult that way. And if we could only take off this part of the cage, then everything wouldn't be a problem at all, or it would be much easier. But getting all this stuff through the tiny openings, that's the difficult part. So now a kind of final conclusion. Yes, it's awesome, but it was probably the most difficult build I ever made. It's really not easy. And I really would like Orlandoo maybe to release a receiver ESC unit, as they had already released and always use in the Orlandoo bouncer. Super ugly, big box here, fitting to the cage of the Orlandoo rock bouncer. This would be super easy. The way I did it was not easy at all. You have to make your wiring to save room, and the solution with the battery is far from perfect. It works awesome, but of course not being able to take out the batteries is not a perfect solution, but much better than having the battery here or even here. There was not enough room inside to make an interior including backrests. I wanted to make backrests, so I simply printed out Wild Willys driver in 1:32 scale and glued them. Do I recommend the Orlandoo rock bouncer? Pooh, if it's your first Orlandoo, for sure not. That's by far the most difficult build after building the kit. If you didn't build any Orlandoo before, no. As first Orlandoo, build the Mitsubishi, build the, I broke off the mirror right now, build the Land Rover or build the Jeep. You have much more room for all the electronics. Check this out, that's from a Land Rover. Normal receiver, normal ESC. And if you don't want to mount the LED lights, the building is not a problem at all. You have this huge amount of space here, also in the Mitsubishi. Here's another Mitsubishi body, so much easier. In the Ford you don't have so much room because the cabin is much smaller. In the Jeep it's also quite easy, you have quite a lot of room, and in the Dodge you have this new steering system. So if it's your first Orlandoo, wasn't that good of a quality, buy the D90, buy the Pajero. They are most easy to build simply because they have the largest room for all the electronics. So that's it for this video, guys. I guess there's not much more to say. Super cool rock bouncer, but not a super easy build. But as you can see here, it is possible to make it nicely to use driver figures, at least driver heads, and to make it even cooler than the versions you saw where the whole receiver unit and batteries fill the cage. Now I'm really happy with it. A running video outdoors would be nice, but we had snow now already, and we have Corona lockdown, and it's December, weather is really ugly, and tiny batteries don't like 0 degrees Celsius or less, so probably there will be an outdoor bashing video soon from me and my Orlandoo rock bouncer, but I will bash it indoor. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. And as you know, I'll be back.